Some designs you can forget the moment you turn in the file. Others follow you home. They seep into your dreams, turn up in places they shouldn't be, and remind you they're not finished with you. This isn't about deadlines or creative differences. This is about the shirt that still keeps me up at night. Because what Travis Scott wanted printed on it wasn't just merch. It was an invitation to something I can't unsee. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they keep their files. Some people color code, some label neatly. Elena Vargas didn't believe in either. Her folders were battle-scarred, creased edges, bent paper clips, coffee rings bleeding through manila stock. They weren't stored on a bookshelf or in a cabinet. They were hidden in a scuffed leather satchel she must have carried everywhere. When I first opened it, I expected the usual. Press clippings, backstage passes, maybe receipts. What I got instead felt like trespassing into someone else's nightmares. The first folder I touched had a faint chemical smell, like printer ink that never quite dried. The paper was warm to the touch, even though her apartment was cold. There were documents with jagged redactions, not the clean, bureaucratic kind, but messy black smears that looked like they were applied with urgency, almost rage. One had a faint watermark, confidential, U.S. Department, barely visible unless you tilted it toward the window. Another had tiny burn marks along the edge, as if someone tried and failed to destroy it. The names inside were the kind you didn't expect to see together. Chart-topping rappers alongside political donors, brand CEOs next to washed-up reality stars. Every page hinted at connections that didn't make sense until you realized they weren't supposed to. And then there was the folder that stopped me cold. It was thinner than the rest, like someone had pulled most of its contents out in a hurry. No cover sheet, no table of contents, just 3 pages, clipped together with a rusted binder clip that squealed when I pried it open. The tour shirt mock-up was printed on thin, almost translucent paper. The ink lines were shaky, as though whoever drew it was being jostled or couldn't keep their hand steady. The design itself was simple but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately name. The proportions off, the smile on the face slightly too far toward one cheek, the eyes glossy black circles that reflected no light. The second page was a printout of a deleted interview with someone from Travis Scott's merch team. The text was warped, like it had been printed from a damaged file. Letters uneven, spacing unpredictable, certain words faint like they were being erased mid-sentence. The last page was Elena's note, and it was barely legible. Her handwriting usually had a controlled elegance to it, but here it was frantic. The loops in her letters were jagged, the pen pressure heavy enough to indent the paper beneath. She'd written, "He becomes what they expect. The design feeds it. Integration complete." Holding those 3 pages felt like holding a fuse. I didn't know where it led, but I knew I didn't want to be around when it reached the charge. The address in the file led me to a part of Houston where the houses seemed to sag under the weight of their own years. Streetlights were dim here, and the air carried the faint smell of rain-soaked asphalt even though the sky was dry. The house itself sat back from the road, half hidden by a hedge that had long since gone feral. The porch steps were warped, the paint on the door flaking in long strips like shedding skin. As I approached, I noticed the porch light wasn't steady. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The man who opened the door didn't bother with a greeting. His eyes scanned me, reading more than my words could say. It was the kind of stare that checked for lies before you even had a chance to tell them. Inside, the air was thick, stale like a room shut for too long, undercut by something faintly metallic, almost like the tang of blood but sharper. The curtains were heavy, pinned to the wall, so not even a blade of sunlight could cut through. Every window bore a cross made from two nailed-together pieces of wood, hand-carved, rough, not bought from a store. Boxes were stacked waist-high in the living room, but the labels told you nothing you wanted to know. Costume records scrawled in black marker, but the box was too light to hold fabric. Witness statements, not safe, written in slanted red ink across another. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had swallowed their story for years and was now spitting out each word with care. He described the long nights at the merch warehouse, the metallic hum of the shirt presses, the way the heat made everything smell faintly of scorched cotton. He spoke of Travis arriving late one night, not rushed, not tired, but with a strange focus, carrying a sketch folded so many times the paper was nearly soft. When the man said he blacked out after touching it, his voice tightened. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't have to. The hollowness in his tone told me he was still missing those hours, still waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for them. And then there was the photo. Faded, low light. The man holding up the finished shirt but standing wrong. Spine too stiff, head cocked like it was listening to something no one else could hear. That crude red smile drawn over his real one wasn't just marker. Up close, the ink bled into the paper fibers in a way that made it look almost wet. When I left, the air outside felt different. Too still, like the wind had been cut off at the property line. I carried that photo in my jacket like it might burn through the fabric if I held it too close. The compound was quieter than I expected. For a place tied to a name as big as Travis Scott's, I anticipated noise, music leaking from somewhere, engines revving, at least the sound of people moving around. But it was silent, and the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums until you started hearing your own heartbeat louder than you should. The guard at the gate wore a neutral expression, the kind you learn when you've seen too much but can't afford to react. He glanced at the badge I'd spent a full day forging, then waved me through without a question. The building they led me to was set apart from the others, its walls painted a sterile white that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hallway inside was narrow, lined with framed photographs from past tours. Every smiling face in those frames felt wrong somehow. Not in the obvious ways, but in the subtler cues. A grip too tight on a mic, an eyeline that wasn't quite aimed at the camera, smiles that didn't seem to belong to the rest of the face. When the guard gestured to the black door at the end of the hall, my pulse spiked. He said, "He's expecting you." But the way he avoided looking at the door made it sound more like a warning than an invitation. The room beyond was pure dark. No furniture outlines, no ambient glow from electronics, just the faint sound of fabric shifting. When Travis stepped into the sliver of light from the hall, his expression was calm. Not warm, not cold, just aware. Like he'd been standing there long before I arrived, waiting for the script to catch up to him. When he said, "You think this is about merch?" His voice didn't echo the way it should have in that empty space. It was like the words went straight into me instead of bouncing off the walls. And when he led me toward the display case holding the original shirt, glass caught the light in a way that briefly made the printed face look three-dimensional, like it might push forward and press against the barrier at any second. The memory of that train ride still knots my stomach because it wasn't just a strange moment. It was the first time I felt the shirt choose me. It had been late, well past rush hour. The car was mostly empty when I sat down, folder in my lap, the city swaying past in darkened glass. The rocking motion of the train had a way of loosening the edges of your thoughts. I remember staring at my own reflection, half glimpsed between streaks of grime on the window until my eyelids dragged shut. I must have slept only seconds before something changed. The air temperature dropped. Not cold exactly, but dense, as if the oxygen had been compressed. My ears popped like I'd gone up a mountain. That's when I noticed the hum of the train had shifted into a lower frequency, the kind that you feel in your chest. When I opened my eyes, the car had stretched. I mean, physically. It felt longer, the end farther away than it had been. And sitting there, almost too far to see clearly, was a figure in a faded Astroworld shirt. At first, it was the design that caught my attention. Flat black eyes on fabric that seemed to absorb light. But then I realized the head above the shirt wasn't moving. Shoulders hunched forward, elbows planted on knees. It sat there as if the body had been poured into that posture and then left to set. I should have looked away. I should have stood, moved cars, pulled the emergency brake, anything. But the moment I tried to shift my gaze, the shirt's printed smile widened. Not in real time, but in jerky, frame-by-frame increments, like an old stop-motion reel flickering forward. And then the head turned. No, rotated. The body didn't move at all, but the neck pivoted far past what bone should allow until the face locked eyes with me. What I saw in those eyes wasn't fabric ink. It was depth, bottomless, reflective like water before a plunge. I knew, without logic, that if I stared long enough, I'd fall straight through. The laugh came next. It didn't echo from the figure. It didn't even seem to come from a single place. It was in the soles of my shoes, in the vibration of the seat beneath me, in the wetness under my tongue. It was a laugh I'd heard in stadium clips, but slowed down, pitch shifted, until the joy had been scraped out and replaced with something hungry. My breath fogged the window beside me. That's when I noticed it. The word run, written in a hand that curved elegantly like someone taught to write before keyboards existed. I blinked, and the train was back to normal. Commuters filled the seats. A man was nodding off to my left, but the condensation streaks remained, faint and uneven, like the word had only just been wiped away. Inside the studio, under that oppressive darkness, Travis moved like someone who already knew how the scene would play out. There was no surprise in his voice, no curiosity. He looked at me, the way a chess player looks at a pawn about to make the move they'd been waiting for. He didn't rush to the display case. He let the silence sit, heavy enough that I could hear my pulse ticking in my ears. When he finally stepped toward the glass, the shirt inside wasn't resting flat. The mannequin torso beneath it was tilted forward slightly, as though leaning to study us in return. "She's been with me since the beginning," he said. His voice was even, but his hands twitched almost imperceptibly when he spoke about her, like the words themselves were a live wire. "Back when I was selling CDs out of my trunk." back when nobody knew my name. I asked who she was, and his eyes didn't blink for the longest beat. Then, like a teacher testing a student's attention, he said, "There are 4 of them. Spirits. Old ones. Each rides through something different. This one rides through conflict. She's war." He circled me slowly, and I could feel the heat of his presence just behind my shoulder. "It's always your choice," he said, his tone making it sound less like a reassurance and more like a dare. Then he held out the shirt. The cotton wasn't soft or stiff. It was warm, almost too warm, like it had been resting against skin. The moment my fingers closed on it, a thrum rolled up my arms and into my chest. It wasn't pain, but it carried the same inevitability as touching a live wire. You know, you shouldn't hold on, but you do anyway. Sound rushed in from all sides. Whispered phrases in languages I didn't know. Applause layered with screaming, a deep bass like a distant explosion. My mind lit with images. My name splashed across LED screens. Hands in the air chanting my name. Headlines declaring my genius. But between every image was a flash of something else. Glass bottles shattering, fists clenched mid-swing, faces twisted in rage. When the shirt slipped from my grip, it hit the ground harder than it should have, as though it carried its own gravity. "You felt it?" he said, crouching to retrieve it. "Once you wear it, it wears you." The decision to burn it wasn't rational. It was instinct. The prop barn smelled of sawdust and rusted metal, a place where forgotten set pieces came to die. I found the blowtorch hanging on a hook, heavy in my hand, its metal chilled from disuse. Outside, the lot was deserted. The air was thick with the faint ozone tang that comes just before a storm. I dropped the shirt onto the gravel, flicked the torch to life, and squeezed the trigger. The flame bloomed blue at its core, orange at its edges. When the fire kissed the cotton, the reaction was immediate. The smile on the design puckered, darkened, and seemed to curl inward as though trying to protect itself. The flames shifted color, bright orange, then a sudden unnatural green that hissed like frying fat before settling into a suffocating black smoke. The smell was unlike any fabric I'd burned before. Sweet and cloying, layered with the stomach-turning reek of something organic cooking too long. I was still watching it shrink into a bubbling mass when I felt him before I saw him. Travis stepped out from the shadow of the storage building, his expression unreadable. He didn't shout or rush forward. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the last threads crumple into ash. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "I burned it," I told him, and the words felt hollow the moment they left my mouth. He shook his head, slow and deliberate. "You still don't get it." From the pocket of his hoodie, he pulled another shirt, identical, the ink still crisp. He turned it in his hands with the casual grace of a card shark flipping a playing card. "You think it's about the fabric?" His voice carried the weight of certainty. "It's always been about the choice." He slid the shirt on over what he was wearing. The shoulders hunched, the printed smile seemed to twitch wider. And then that laugh, low, stretched, ancient, spilled out, not from his mouth, but from somewhere deep inside the design itself. Leaving the lot felt like waking from anesthesia, movement returning in pieces, sounds catching up a few seconds late, the ground underfoot not quite matching the rhythm in my head. The main gates were half open, the kind of posture a place keeps when it expects more arrivals than departures. A generator somewhere to my right coughed out a steady thrum, and every few beats a tower light pulsed, bathing the asphalt in a harsh, clinical white that made shadows look deeper than darkness. That's when the golf cart came humming across the service lane and rolled to a stop just shy of the badge kiosk. The kid in the passenger seat hopped off before the cart fully braked, kinetic in a way I recognized immediately. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder with the zipper only halfway closed, a notebook peeking out, pages fanned like a thin paper wing. On his other hand, a cheap ring of hex keys jingled. Screen printer tools, the kind you toss in your pocket and forget until you hear them announce you in a quiet room. A studio rep took the driver's seat, clipboard on a lanyard, the plastic sleeve fogged along the edges from humidity. She was saying something to him in that upbeat, "I've done this briefing 1,000 times" cadence, hitting each point with a soft clap against the clipboard. Badge rules, NDA drop, quick safety walk. Press is off limits. Phones face down in certain rooms. Last shuttle leaves at 1:40 a.m. He nodded too fast, smiling like he wanted to be agreeable to the air itself. The badge runner at the kiosk barely looked up while printing his credentials. The laminated card slid out of the machine, still warm. The ink smelled sharp for a second before the night air thinned it out. He turned, and I caught his face, full on. There's a particular look people get right before they say yes to a version of themselves they've been chasing for years. It's not exactly joy. It's closer to relief, like stepping through a door you've been knocking on so long your knuckles are numb. He had that look. I felt the word rise in my throat, not even formed enough to be language yet. A pulse of sound, a warning I didn't know how to shape. I raised a palm, not quite a wave, more like the universal sign for wait. Just a second. Hold still. Listen. For half a beat, his smile faltered, curiosity crossing his face like a small shadow, and it could have gone either way. Ask me what I meant. Keep walking. Pretend I was waving at someone behind him. The generator hiccuped, the tower light snapped, and the moment broke. The rep angled her clipboard toward the interior road, clapped his shoulder with practiced encouragement, and the cart rolled on. The kid flashed the kind of grin you hand out when you think someone has recognized you from a room you're not famous in yet. He mouthed a two-syllable, "Thank you," I couldn't hear, and pivoted toward the gate. The badge scanner pinged. The turnstile unlocked. He disappeared past the line where the lot's brightness ends and the campus's curated darkness begins. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the seam where the road bends behind the soundstage and becomes nobody's business but the schedule's. A moth battered itself against the plexi guard of the badge machine, frantic and stubborn, and for a second I envied the clarity of its mistake. The guard inside the kiosk looked at me through the glass with the glazed patience of someone trained to let people decide their own endings. He didn't ask if I needed help. He didn't need to. On the walk back to the street, the sounds of the compound receded in layers. Forklift beeps first, then the cooling tick of an engine. Finally, the generator falling back into a baseline you feel more than hear. Outside the gate, the city read as neutral again. A strip of road, a trio of sodium lamps, a billboard on the far side of a drainage ditch pushing an energy drink that promised velocity. A stray dog trotted the shoulder and glanced at me with a quick, feral assessment before returning to whatever route it kept. I cut across the empty employee lot and caught my reflection in a tinted SUV window. The person looking back had ash dust on his sleeves, eyes too wide, posture pitched slightly forward like he was braced for an impact that had already happened. Behind the glass, faint and doubled, the trace of that printed grin from the shirt lived in my memory with terrible clarity, the way a flashbulb image hangs on the retina if you close your eyes too fast.